Hello, my name is 환산스님 and this is Sun Meditation in English. Are we ready to meditate? For today's topic of meditation and contemplation, I'm happy to announce that today's program will be the first of a special three-part series on the Sun Buddhist approach to health, to getting into shape. Then please assume correct meditation posture. Remember to tuck in your chin just slightly so that the top of your head rises to the ceiling. Lightly place the tip of your tongue against the roof of your mouth. Check all your reference points. And now let's begin preparation breathing. So together, inhale deeply through the nose. Hold. Then exhale through the mouth. And now let's begin our hwadu, 이모고. So inhale, hold, and then together, 이모고. Once more, inhale, hold, then together, 이모고. 이모고, Y-I-M-W-O-T-G-O. This. What is this? What is this that directs my body? When I think a thought, what is it within me that generates that thought? 이모고. What is this that asks, what is this? One more time, inhale. Hold. And then one more time out loud. 이모고. So once again, I will ask our studio audience members and our viewers at home to continue with this posture, this abdominal breathing, and the meditation upon 이모고 throughout the course of today's program. What is the Buddhist approach to maintaining and enhancing our health? To put it in more simple language, what is the Buddhist way of getting into shape? More and more these days, I think people are very health conscious. They're very concerned about maintaining their health as they age and as we live our very, very busy lives in modern society. And I think many, if not most of us, have had the experience of trying to do something about our health, trying to lose weight or get in shape or maybe recover from a serious illness. And what so many of us find, again, if not most of us, is that it's very, very difficult to create long-term change in our physique. We lose weight, we may succeed in losing weight, but then most dieters, statistically speaking, most people who lose weight gain it right back within the next few years at the most. We may get into great shape going to health clubs or doing whatever exercise of choice that we may be engaged in, but after time, again, we find ourselves falling out of shape. We may try to change our habits, give up smoking or give up drinking or give up overeating, things like that. And for a while, we may enjoy enhancement in our health, but at some point, we often find that we go right back to our old bad, unhealthy habits. And so there seems to be almost like a baseline that we can't get past. A basic level of health, a basic level of well-being that we can find very, very difficult to enhance. Now, from the Buddhist perspective, the reason why we may fall into a state of bad physical or mental health, or at least a state of health that we're not satisfied with, is because of our own negative actions, our own negative behavior. And from the Buddhist perspective, the way to approach changing our health is to change that negative behavior, to eradicate it, and to replace it with positive, healthy behavior. In fact, the entire teaching of Buddhism can be, in a sense, said to be about this, about changing our bodies and our minds, because Buddhism has always been about the quest to overcome personal suffering, and that includes suffering on the physical level, that includes suffering on the health level. So what is the Buddhist approach, the basic Buddhist approach to maintaining our health, our overall well-being. Now, I have discussed this teaching that I'm about to talk about for today's program. It's called the 3 learnings. And I have discussed this teaching before on this program, specifically in chapter 14, in the context of setting up a meditation practice at home. But today I would like to look at the 3 learnings again from a slightly different angle and go into more concrete detail about how the 3 learnings, if we correctly understand them and apply them, how they can transform both our minds and our bodies. Now, the 3 learnings are the 3 basic components of the Buddha's original teaching on gaining enlightenment that he was said to have taught in his own time. And the 3 learnings are, first, the precepts, moral discipline; second, meditative concentration; and then third, wisdom, the wisdom that is attained by applying moral discipline and meditative concentration. And the classic metaphor within Sun Buddhism that describes the relationship between the precepts, meditative concentration, and wisdom is that of a cup of water. The precepts are said to be like a cup that has no defect and that is clean on the inside. This cup has to be non-defective. It has to be sound and whole and clean in order for it to hold water without the water leaking out and without the water being tainted by some kind of pollutant that might be inside the cup. Meditative concentration is the water itself that goes into the cup. If the cup is free of defect and clean, then the water will be undisturbed and very clear when it's inside the cup. And when the water settles down, then the moon of wisdom will be reflected in the water. The moon of enlightenment will be reflected in the water. So the basic idea is that the precepts give structure, a healthy structure to our lives, to our thought, our speech, and behavior, so that we are able to practice our meditation with inner stability and focus, and which leads us to the wisdom of enlightenment. So in its original description, the 3 learnings is said to be a linear progression, beginning with moral discipline that leads us through meditative concentration into the wisdom of enlightenment. That's the classic presentation of the 3 learnings. But if you actually practice it, what you will find is that the process is actually cyclical. What you do first is you try to apply the moral precepts. And this gives you enhanced concentration. As you come into a sense of clarity about what you believe and have confidence about it and gain stability from that, then you gain advances in your meditation. And as your meditation improves, you gain wisdom, which again in the Buddhist context is not accumulation of knowledge, but clarity of perception and insight. In this case, we gain clarity and perception of clarity of perception and insight into our own behavior. We understand what we're doing wrong, and that allows us to approach our precepts with greater intensity and precision, which again gives us greater concentration, which again gives us greater insight of wisdom. So it's a virtuous cycle of practice and behavior. So this is basically how it works. And the 3 learnings are also called the middle path. This is a very well-known way of describing the Buddhist teachings. And basically what it means, what the middle path means, is that it avoids the extremes of indulging in our sense pleasures and the extreme of torturing or mortifying our body. In this case, the middle path doesn't mean that we moderate things, that we don't do too much or too little, although that is the end result. What it really means is that we are able to transcend self-indulgence and self-denial because we avoid the pitfalls that those kind of extremes create. When we indulge the senses, when we become attached to pleasure, this is considered an inappropriate or improper approach to our own experience that ultimately leads to suffering, because no pleasure ever lasts long, and when we lose it, we feel more suffering and more dejection, and the pleasure distracts us from the most important things in life. On the other hand, the extreme of self-denial, of being very hard on ourselves physically or mentally, denying ourselves food or rest or water, things like that, that's also considered to be wrong-headed in its approach to the problem of suffering, because that extreme assumes that the origin of suffering is in the body, that if we can somehow control the body, we can overcome suffering. But from the Buddhist perspective, the origin of suffering is not the body, but the unenlightened mind. We need to approach the mind first, and then we can get hold of the body. And that is the basic strategy of the Buddhist teaching. So once again, let's consider the question of health again. Now, in some circles, there's a stereotype of Buddhist monastics as being very emaciated and frail, never eating, never sleeping, very thin and weak. But actually, that is an incorrect and distorting stereotype of Buddhist monastics. The Buddha's disciples were actually famous for being extremely healthy and being quite joyful. They were not cynical or pessimistic rejectors of the world. They knew how to live. And many people were said to be inspired to follow the Buddha by meeting his disciples, because they saw the disciples with their health and their well-being and their happiness, and they thought, well, I want to be like that too. So that was the first sort of spreading of the Buddhist teaching, not by giving lectures and sermons and things like that, but by simply embodying the benefits that you can gain by following the Buddhist teaching. So with regard to our own health, in the course of today's program, why don't we begin assessing our own approach to health in the context of the Buddhist teaching? So we can simply ask ourselves, are we satisfied with our current state of health? Are we where we want to be? And if the answer to our question is no, if we're not satisfied with our own health, we can ask ourselves in a very modern way, because in the modern, in the way that I think health is portrayed in modern society now, it's usually spoken of in terms of maintaining our diet, our exercise, and a healthy sleeping pattern. So from the Buddhist perspective, that's a limited view of health, but nonetheless, we can use that as a basic standard or rule of thumb. And we can ask ourselves, well, are we eating properly? Are we exercising properly? Are we sleeping properly? And if the answer to any or all of those questions is no, then what we know is that we are engaged in self-defeating behaviors. We are not eating properly, or we are not exercising properly, or we are not sleeping properly. These are our behaviors, and we may not be doing any of them right. So why do we have these self-defeating behaviors? And from the Buddhist perspective, the answer to why we engage in behaviors that are harmful to us and possibly harmful to others is because we do not know how to manage our own thoughts and emotions. We have a negative or unhealthy approach to managing our thoughts and emotions. And what that means is that we are responding to our negative thoughts and emotions in an unhealthy way. We are acting upon our negative thoughts and emotions, and that causes us to behave in a negative way and in an unhealthy way. We may try to eat to cheer ourselves up, or we may stay up all night on the computer to try and forget something bad that happened during the day, perhaps at the office or perhaps at home. We may make excuses not to follow our exercise schedule because we feel unmotivated. We tell ourselves we feel bad, we think that we're lazy, but what's happening is that we are following unhealthy or negative lines of thought and emotion. So what is the solution to this? The Buddhist teaching is very, very interesting in that the first step to gaining health, well-being, happiness, freedom from suffering, however you want to call it, is a moral one. He asks us to be good, to be engaged in good behaviors. And the way that the Buddhist teaching was summarized and presented in the Buddha's own lifetime was through an edict called the Precepts Common to the Seven Buddhas. And that means the precepts that legendarily, supposedly, that our historical Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, and his 6 predecessor Buddhas in different world ages were said to have taught. And it's a very, very simple 4-line formula that holds the essence of his entire teaching, the entire Buddhist tradition. So the first line is, do not commit any evil. The second teaching or line is make an effort to enact all forms of good. The third line is on your own, keep the mind clean. And then the fourth line is this is all of the Buddha's teachings. This teaching seems very simple, may even sound kind of plain, but I assure you it is an extraordinarily profound teaching, and actually the entire Buddhist tradition, again, is basically an expression of these four lines. So let's start with the first one again, do not commit any evil. Now there are an endless array of evil behaviors or negative behaviors that we can engage in. And so what happened in time was that there were selected, the Buddha's successors selected 10 basic misdeeds, 10 basic misbehaviors or negative or unskillful actions that we should really focus on trying to avoid. So these are 3 physical actions or behaviors, 4 verbal actions or behaviors, and finally 3 mental attitudes or postures or mindsets that we are asked to avoid. So the first evil that we are asked to commit is do not kill any living beings. Now, we have to bear in mind that the precepts refer principally to actions of intention. So for today, we'll just put aside the thought of accidentally killing living beings by, for example, stepping on insects or something like that, and just think in terms of intentionally killing living beings. What we need to understand is when we say kill, it doesn't simply mean take the physical life of a living being, but to intentionally harm or hurt other living beings. So in a grisly context, maybe in a time of war, torture would also be covered by this first precept. Any act to harm someone, going beyond that, any act to psychologically harm or hurt someone that's done deliberately. All of these forms of cruelty are covered in the first precept. And it's covered there because this is considered to destroy our capacity for empathy, for compassion, for feeling the suffering of other living beings. And when we lose that capacity, we lose our connection with the world of living beings. So this first precept is our first step toward health, is do not kill living beings. The second one is do not steal the belongings of others. Again, this doesn't mean simply robbing or thieving, because relatively speaking, few people actually directly engage in thievery. But it also means scheming or planning or working to take something that rightfully belongs to someone else. It also means denying someone something that rightfully belongs to them. So if you're trying to get something that someone else has through indirect means, that's still stealing. Now the third precept is do not engage in wicked and lascivious behavior. Typically and traditionally, this is interpreted to mean sexual behavior, intimate relations between people. Some modern Buddhist teachers have said that really it's a precept that's in place to protect marriage. So it's really, married people should not get intimately involved with other people, nor should single people get intimately involved with people who are married to other people. That's one way of interpreting it, to limit the scope of this teaching. Another modern interpretation of this precept is that it refers to any mutually consented long-term monogamous relationship. In that case, if you have a very serious boyfriend or girlfriend or partner or whatever, that if you get involved with someone during that time, that's considered a violation of this precept. Or if you get involved with someone who's understood to be in a monogamous relationship, again, that's a violation of this precept. Now, this is a very, very touchy area. For many people in this day and age don't like to have their private lives, sort of touched upon. Certainly nobody likes to hear instructions on how to live our private lives in this day and age. And in this context, I think Sun Master Songdam's teaching is especially relevant because he interprets this precept to mean what is our relationship to pleasure of the senses. That is really the crux of this precept. And seen from that point of view, anything that arouses our desire and an inappropriate attachment through means of sense pleasure through the senses, it falls under this precept that we are asked to conduct our response to sense pleasure in a morally and spiritually appropriate way. So anything, if it arouses us, falls like this, anything that we become especially attached to. So it could be food, it could be music, it could be something that we see on the computer, anything that puts us in a state where we are out of balance. We are aroused and in a state of imbalance. Our minds are clouded and we are prone to becoming attached to something that we are not supposed to have, that will not be good for us, then that falls under this precept. And I think that that is a very wise and helpful way to look at this. We don't feel as much that we're judging ourselves so much as that we are acting in the interest of our own health and the overall welfare of those around us. So this is a teaching that I'm very happy to share with you. It's been very helpful for us disciples of Sun Master Songdam. So those are the three physical actions that we are asked to avoid, the three physical misdeeds. Do not kill, do not steal, do not engage in wicked and lascivious behavior. The next four are verbal ones. Do not lie. Now this also includes omission of truth. After that, do not engage in licentious and profane speech. Now, licentious and profane speech basically means idle chatter, where people exaggerate things and distort things and speak basically for amusement. So this we are asked to refrain from. The next is do not engage in divisive speech, where we set people against each other. And the fourth is do not engage in evil speech. Evil speech is speech that is intended to harm people. Originally, it means insulting and cursing people. But more broadly speaking, it's sort of the verbal equivalent of not killing living beings. You don't want to psychologically or socially hurt some other person, some other living being. And in that case, under evil speech, we can also include criticism. Intense criticism that is emotionally motivated to harm, suppress, or in some way debilitate another person. And it also includes sarcasm. Sarcasm is a way of pretending to say a nice thing to humiliate or degrade someone when you mean just the opposite. And that also falls under the heading of evil speech. So evil speech is more than speech that's emotionally out of control. It is always speech that is intended to leave a wound in someone's heart. Finally, there are three mindsets that we are asked to avoid. The first is do not give rise to the mind of craving. Craving means attachment, to become attached to something that we want to own and hold forever. And this is inherently considered a harmful mind state because it is a mindset that is inherently impoverished. No matter what we have, suddenly we want this one thing. It could be an object, it could be another person, it could be a position in society. Whatever it is, suddenly we want this thing in such a distorted, unbalanced, and unrealistic way that all that we have no longer matters. Fundamentally, we are behaving in it as if we're very, very poor, as if we don't have this one thing, we don't have anything at all. And this is a very powerful distortion of our perception of reality. So we are asked to recognize when when we've entered into that mindset and do what we can to get out of it. The second is do not give rise to the mind of anger. Now, normally people think of anger as losing your temper with someone, shouting at them or abusing them in some way, but it's more than just a display of anger. What it really refers to is a mindset of resentment, where we harbor thoughts, very critical, harsh thoughts about people or things around us. And we also harbor not only thoughts of resentment, but hostile, aggressive thoughts. This, I think for many or most of us, we experience the mind of anger, even when we don't look very angry, when we're having fantasies of revenge, of getting back at someone who we think has harmed us in some way. This is the mind of anger, even though we may not be superficially engaged in angry behavior, but this is setting the stage for harmful behavior, for evil speech, or for killing or wounding or hurting other people. So the mind of anger is considered very, very dangerous, and we need to understand that it's not simply a state of rage, but sometimes a low-burning, simmering, seething state that we can see very quickly in the kind of imagery and thinking that we have in our minds if we know how to meditate and observe ourselves. Finally, the last mindset is do not become attached to wrongful and foolish views. This is sometimes called the mind of foolishness. In the Western context, it's often called the mind of delusion. A deluded state of mind where you're out of touch with reality. Reality meaning, from the Buddhist perspective, reality, the most important thing about the reality that we live in is that we live in a world of causality. If we do something, there is a response, there is a reaction in the world. Actions produce results. There is no way to do something and not pay the consequences for it. So in the classic formula, positive actions produce positive results and negative actions produce negative results. And the mind of delusion refuses to recognize this reality. And again, we can recognize this mind of delusion not because we're literally intellectually stupid or foolish, but because we begin to harbor thoughts that just aren't possible. If only I could get this one thing, as if no one would be affected by it. If I can just do this thing, and act like nothing will change after that. Those kind of things. These thoughts of getting away with something or getting something for nothing. You know, maybe I could just win the lotto tomorrow, you know, the lottery tomorrow. Thoughts like that are considered to be delusional, and they're harmful in that they deflect our attention away from reality and cause us to embark on very foolish actions. Now, these are very austere precepts. And within the Sun Buddhist context, the only way really that we can have a hope of trying to apply ourselves to these precepts is by using meditation. So when we begin to feel like we might take harmful action, hurt or kill another living being, we do the posture, the breathing, and imoko. When we feel like we're going to scheme to get something that doesn't belong to us, we do imoko. When we become inappropriately attached to some stimulating pleasure, again, we go back to imoko. When we find ourselves on the verge of saying something foolish or damaging or unhealthy, we go again to imoko. When we find ourselves in one of the three mindsets, craving or anger or delusion, once again, we do imoko. And what happens is, as we attempt to correct our physical, verbal, and mental actions and behaviors, we begin to experience a greater sense of inner unity. We begin to lose a sense of inner conflict. We begin to lose the sense of shame or regret over actions that we perform that later we think weren't so great. We begin to lose the guilt and the fear of being discovered. And as that happens, we gain in confidence and inner calmness and self-respect. And this gives us increased mental power to meditate. That meditation creates an increase in clarity of insight, which we can again direct back to our own behavior. And then we can begin to see how our mind, our thoughts and feelings can come out in our facial expressions even when we're not saying or doing anything. We can see how that we sometimes speak carelessly, not understanding how our words may affect other people. And we can see how that all this begins with the three harmful mindsets. And we begin to observe. So we create this virtuous cycle. And it's very important that we begin with these precepts that tell us what not to do. Because we need to remove our negative behaviors first before trying to take on positive behaviors. If we do, for example, to use a health parallel, I might be a very heavy smoker. That's a negative behavior. And I might want to try to get healthy, so I might say, well, eat right and exercise and sleep right. But if I don't get rid of the smoking habit, none of this is going to be very helpful. In the same way, if I don't address the most harmful habits that I have that interfere in my self-care and interfere in my relationships with others, then it doesn't matter how many wonderful things I'm doing if I'm doing one of these 10 misdeeds. So we first work on correcting our misdeeds, which is again the first teaching that the Buddha gives. Do not commit any evil. And as we get better and better at this, we begin to gain confidence and stability. And one day we can look in the mirror and think, I'm doing okay. You know, I have a basic inner center that I'm able to follow. And that's when we go to the next one, which is make an effort to enact all forms of good. So, and those are the so-called Mahayana 10 positive or good actions. And they stand in opposition to the 10 misdeeds that we just talked about. So briefly then, do not kill living beings. Instead, the good act is work for the welfare of living beings. Work to save the lives of living beings. Next, do not steal. Instead, give away your things. Third, do not engage in wicked and lascivious behavior. Instead, maintain a state of what is traditionally called purity. Now, the word purity can be troublesome for some because it implies that intimate relationships and physical intimacy is somehow impure. But the point of purity, I think, here is that to think of it more in terms of a state of wholesomeness, a state of inner calm and peacefulness. When someone is displaying highly provocative and volatile behavior, either through the way they speak or the way they dress and so forth, it tends to create tension in any social group and division. But when someone is very wholesome and very centered and calm, that tends to promote harmony and unity and stability within a social group. And what meditative practice and the precepts encourage is this very peaceful and very tranquil state of wholesomeness that is very appealing for people to be around. So if we understand it in that way, wholesomeness, purity, will be the opposite of wicked and lascivious behavior. Going on to the verbal precepts, do not lie, instead always speak the truth. Do not engage in idle chatter, which is to say distorted speaking, licentious and profane speech. Instead, always speak accurately and in proportion. Don't put things out of proportion. Do not exaggerate. Do not distort. Speak of things as they are. And then the third is do not engage in divisive speech. Instead, speak in ways that bring people together. Instead, speak in ways that encourage social harmony. The final verbal precept, do not engage in evil speech. Instead, engage in loving speech, in speech that strengthens and encourages and nourishes those around us. Going from there to the three to the three mindsets, do not engage in the mind of desire or craving. Instead, engage in the mind of detachment, of letting go, of things that our minds might accidentally become attached to. Do not engage in the mind of anger. Instead, engage in the mind of loving kindness, love and compassion, a mind that wants the suffering of living beings to end and the happiness of living beings to increase. And finally, do not engage in the mind of delusion. Instead, engage in the mind of wisdom, seeing things clearly. So these are the 10 precepts. These are sort of the codification and systemization of the Buddha's first two teachings, which is do not commit any evil and make an effort to enact all forms of good. And these are codes of moral discipline. And one of the things that we should understand in terms of the Buddhist code of moral discipline is that in the modern world, especially I believe in the modern West, because its religious roots are Judeo-Christian, we tend to think of morality in terms of obligation. In the Old Testament of the Bible, it is said that God gave these moral edicts in the form of 10 commandments. So often in that kind of cultural setting, we think of morality as something that's imposed upon us, a duty that we're asked to carry out. But this is a concept that is completely foreign to Buddhist thinking. In Buddhist thinking, morality is understood not in terms of obligation and duty, but in terms of harmony, in terms of coming into harmony and alignment with all that is around us and all that is within us. By engaging in these precepts of not committing evil acts and committing good acts, what we do is first we come into harmony with those around us. We come into interpersonal harmony in our social environment. The second level of harmony is we gain inner harmony. Our thoughts and our feelings are no longer at odds against each other. We no longer carry secret reservoirs of shame and guilt and regret and fear. These can in turn grow into self-anger, self-contempt, self-disgust, self-hatred, all of which encourage extremely self-destructive and unhealthy behavior. We gain inner mental harmony. And because of these inner mental harmony, we go to the third level of harmony, which is we gain harmony between our mind and our body. Because our mind is at ease with the way that we are living, our bodies no longer experience the harsh levels of stress. It is well known now that highly aggressive people, highly narcissistic people experience heightened levels of stress because they're always in competitive mode, they're always trying to win, and they consider personal setbacks, mistakes, and losses to be great blows to their personal self-esteem and self-image. In contrast, when we've learned to act in a moral way, what we find is an inner state of calmness and clarity that is expressed physically in a corresponding state of calmness and balance and restfulness. And then we go to yet another level of harmony, which is we come into harmony with the natural laws of the universe. From the Buddhist perspective, this is again the law of causality, what's called the law of karma, that all actions create results of the same character, positive to positive, negative to negative. We are understanding and harnessing that law of nature, that scientific law of the universe. In the old language, what that meant was that when we behave in this way, we are creating merit for ourselves. We are creating future prosperity and good fortune for ourselves. Whether you look at it that way or whether you look at it in a simple psychological and social way, one way or the other, we are deploying our understanding of the laws of nature. And so we are in harmony with nature and the universe. Finally, the last level of harmony is we are in harmony spiritually with a path that leads us to enlightenment, to the attainment of ultimate wisdom and compassion. So as astonishing as it may seem, as unusual as it may seem in this day and age where we think of health in terms of nutrition and exercise and things like that, that actually the basis of health in the Buddhist context is our moral behavior. It is our moral behavior that will bring us harmony with our own minds, our bodies, people around us, and ultimately the universe itself. So why don't we take a break here, and when we come back, we'll continue on with this discussion. Now, the principal reward of gaining harmony on all of these different levels through the practice or enactment of moral discipline, of enacting all forms of the refusal to commit any evil and enacting all forms of good, is that through this harmony, we find now that our relationships are no longer impeding us. We're not being hurt or hurting others in relationships and then having to expend energy to recover from that. We're not in conflict with things, and this gives us an extraordinary ability to concentrate within our lives. And that brings us to the third line of the Buddha's original teaching, which is on our own, keep the mind clean. This refers to the practice of meditation itself, and it is an especially good description of how our practice of Hwadu sun meditation works for us, because the Hwadu itself, imoko, and the state of doubt that it creates acts to literally cleanse our minds, which means eliminate distracting, unnecessary thoughts and emotions. And as this happens more and more, the state of doubt becomes more accessible, more natural, more resonant, and more powerful. Now, the thing to remember in all of this, as we enter into and try to sustain our practice of moral discipline and concentration through sun meditation, is the need for patience. We need to be very, very patient with ourselves. According to the classic descriptions of Buddhism, the kinds of mistakes that we make come from lifetimes of negative karma, and therefore we are liable to make similar mistakes over and over again. It won't be that easy to correct our own behavior. Now, often patience, especially within Korean culture, but also within modern Western culture, is often understood in terms of enduring something, of tolerating something with grace, of bearing misery. And certainly that is one component of patience. But I think that the thing that we really need to understand about patience is its note of hopefulness, that no matter how many times we stumble, if we refuse to give up, if we keep getting up again and again and again, trying over and over again, we will get there. That we have to have an optimistic view of our practice and therefore a very generous and forgiving view of ourselves. And if we're going to extend that view to ourselves, then we can extend it to all around us. To be forgiving and to be grateful for what we have, and to proceed with patience and a good sense of humor. And if we can do all that and get to the point where on our own we're keeping our mind clean, then we get to the fourth line of the Buddha's original teaching, which is, this is all of the Buddha's teaching. That is a reference to wisdom. Wisdom not as knowledge, but as the ability to see, to perceive directly the nature of one's own existence and the nature of the world around us. This that's used in that phrasing, this refers to that enlightened wisdom, the enlightenment to this thing within us. So this is the classic Buddhist formula for moving from suffering to happiness, from ignorance to enlightenment, and from a place of disease, both mental and physical, to a place of health. It is an ancient system, 2,500 years old, but it is still surprisingly modern and fits in well with current thinking on so-called holistic health. Now, the term holistic health is used in many different ways, but today what I would like to do is say simply that the Buddha's approach to suffering, to correcting negative behaviors that cause negative states of body and mind, is holistic in the sense that by maintaining our mental, physical, and spiritual health, it helps the whole of our lives. And we live our lives so that it will help the whole of our health on its many levels, the physical, the psychological, the social, and the spiritual. So our habits of health reinforce our habits of living reinforce all the dimensions of our health. So this, I believe, is the first truly holistic health program ever created in human history, or one of the first. And I believe it's especially helpful in this day and age. And in the second part, which will be in our next episode, we'll consider how we can apply the Buddhist teachings of the three learnings to our modern concepts of health, which we often again frame in terms of diet, exercise, sleep, and so forth. So that's something that we can all look forward to. So I hope that you will join us for our next episode. So once again, I would like to thank all the members of our studio audience for attending and our viewers at home for participating. And once again, I will end today's program with the traditional Buddhist greeting, may we all attain the Buddha.